Hello, and welcome to Phenomenon Radio, the show that covers thought-provoking breakthroughs in the fields of UAP UFOs to discover fascinating truths, first-hand accounts, and investigative insights into the expanding confluence of physical and mental exposure to this worldwide phenomenon. Hosted by world-renowned experiencer of the 1980 Rendlesham Bentwaters UFO incident, John Burroughs, and Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist Linda Moulton Howe. And now, leading off the program, here's Linda Moulton Howe.
In December 1980, at RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge in Suffolk County, England, northeast of London near the coast, Airman First Class Lawrence Patrick Warren, also known as Larry Warren, was assigned to D Flight. The shift commander for D Flight's first midnight shift was Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin, who came on at 11 p.m. December 26th and was not supposed to be off until 7 a.m. December 27th. But military eyewitnesses in Rendlesham Forest and the East Gate have reported that Lieutenant Tamplin was so scared that she screamed and cried about a light entering her Jeep in the forest, and she was removed from duty. The next night, Master Sergeant Robert Ball was left in charge of D Flight security. 3 years later, on October 2nd, 1983, it was Larry Warren, then disguised as Art Wallace, who first broke the news about unidentified aerial phenomena intruding at RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge. Larry talked to UK's News of the World. That interview ended up on the front page with a big headline, UFO lands in Suffolk, the forest exploded with blinding light. Along with Larry Warren's first-hand account of what he had seen, the newspaper reprinted an official memorandum written and signed on January 13, 1981, by U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt. He was the RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge Deputy Base Commander. His memo subject was Unexplained Lights and began, quote, early in the morning of 27 December 1980, at approximately 3 a.m., military security personnel reported seeing a strange glowing object in Rendlesham Forest described as being metallic and triangular in shape that had a pulsing red light on top and a bank of blue lights underneath, close quote. The next day, a triangular pattern of depressions were found in the forest ground that emitted low levels of beta-gamma radiation. Colonel Halt's memorandum also stated that 2 nights later, quote, a red, sun-like light moved about and pulsed. At one point, it appeared to throw off glowing particles that broke into 5 separate white objects and then disappeared, close quote. In addition to Colonel Halt's memo, former Airman First Class Larry Warren told News of the World, quote, we were all told to hand in our weapons. The clearing was full of RAF and U.S. Air Force security people, about 200 of them. Several movie cameras had been set up and choppers were flying above. And then we saw an object. It appeared to be resting on the ground and looked like a giant aspirin. It was transparent. We were in awe, never having seen anything like this. We looked up and saw a red ball of light coming towards us from over the trees. It came down right over the transparent round object on the ground. There was no sound at all. We were all mesmerized. And all of a sudden, the red light exploded. The place was filled with an explosion of all kinds of colors. We were blinded. When the colors died down, there was a machine there. Then I realized the vehicle was inhabited. There were beings aboard. I didn't see them because I was on the other side of the craft, but others did. They said there were 3, and they were wearing silver suits, close quote. Today, in October 2015, we now know that the actual dates of events began during the 3rd midnight shift of sea flight from 11 p.m. Christmas night, December 25th, to 7 a.m. the morning of December 26th. That's when Airman First Class John Burroughs, Staff Sergeant James Peniston, and Airman Ed Kavancek went off the air base into Rendlesham Forest to investigate strange lights moving rapidly in the trees. And that's when Airman Burroughs and Sergeant Peniston encountered a blast of white light from which a black triangular craft with symbols raised on it emerged out of the light. C Flight then went off duty, and the first midnight shift of D Flight came on at 11 p.m. December 26th to 7 a.m. December 27th. It was during that night that D Flight Shift Commander Bonnie Tamplin was so frightened by a light that she was removed from duty, and Master Sergeant Robert Ball was left in charge of D Flight security. The second midnight shift of D Flight came on at 11 p.m. on December 27th until 7 a.m. December 28th. That was the night that Colonel Halt took a dozen men or more into Rendlesham Forest with light-alls, Geiger counters, cameras, and he tape recorded what everyone was saying about strange lights and beams. Airman Larry Warren was on that D shift, but he says he was in another part of Rendlesham Forest not connected to Colonel Halt's investigation. Larry says he was with another group that also encountered a craft and insists that Base Commander Gordon Williams was there and communicated with non-human beings. That's why Larry Warren told the News of the World in October 1983, quote, "There were beings aboard. I didn't see them because I was on the other side of the craft, but others did. They said there were 3, and they were wearing silver suits," close quote. Further, Larry Warren had a private meeting with me and New York mathematics professor Benton Jameson on May 18, 1986, in New Haven, Connecticut. That was only 6 years after the events in Rendlesham Forest. Ben and I each ran our own tape recorders for several hours of Larry telling us everything he remembered. That entire Larry Warren transcript is at my news website, Earthfiles.com, beginning in the Earthfiles archive of January 26, 2010, in an 11-part series of reports entitled RAF Bentwaters' 1986 interview with former Airman Larry Warren. Larry told Ben and me that the 81st Squadron commander, Malcolm Zickler, threatened military eyewitnesses to keep their mouths shut about what they had seen in Rendlesham Forest. Larry said these are words attributed to 81st Squadron Commander Zickler, quote, "If you make it too difficult for us, bullets are cheap," close quote. That is exactly what Sergeant Adrian Bustinza told us on Phenomenon Radio in August 2015. Adrian's first exclusive media broadcast since December 1980. But it was Adrian Bustinza who was threatened. Larry Warren, back in 1986, admitted to Ben and me that he had talked to the News of the World not only about his own experiences, but mixed in what D Flight Sergeant Adrian Bustinza had told Larry while Adrian sobbed in their barracks room in March of 1981, so traumatized by what had happened. That's when Sergeant Bustinza told Larry that he had been threatened not to talk with the bullets are cheap threat and was ordered to explain the aerial phenomena in Rendlesham Forest as reflections from a lighthouse miles away. But Sergeant Bustinza refused to lie. It was also Sergeant Bustinza in the early morning hours of December 28, 1980, who was walking beside Airman John Burroughs toward the red, orange, blue, and white lights and suddenly found himself on the ground. Adrian told us it felt like the lights forced him down as he saw John Burroughs surrounded by the red-orange light. John does not remember what happened. Back in 1986, Larry told Ben Jameson and me that when Adrian broke down and cried in their barracks, that's when Larry told Adrian he would get their story out to the newspapers. Here's what Larry told us in that 1986 recorded interview about what he said to Sergeant Adrian Bustinza. Quote, "I'll do it as my first hand, but you've got to back me up as soon as it comes out and tell what happened in detail." Close quote. Larry added, quote, "Some bad things happened to Adrian," close quote. What we're all trying to understand is why has there been so much secrecy and intimidation of military witnesses to not talk since the December 1980 lights, beams, and triangular craft? The Deputy Base Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt himself, described in a 2010 press release as, quote, extraterrestrial in origin, close quote. Larry Warren is an historic hero for being the first RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge eyewitness to break open some of the Rendlesham Forest truth in 1983. After this short break, Larry Warren joins Phenomenon Radio to discuss what he saw himself in Rendlesham Forest after midnight on December 28, 1980. And with him will be Peter Robbins, co-author of Larry's 1997 book, Left at Eastgate.
Thanks, Linda. You're listening to Phenomenon Radio live on KGRA DB with Bentwaters experiencer John Burroughs and Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist and Earthfiles reporter and editor Linda Moulton Howe. Tonight's special guests, Larry Warren and Peter Robbins, will join the show right after these messages. Stay with us. Thanks for joining us tonight on Phenomenon Radio for tonight's interview with very special guests, Larry Warren and Peter Robbins. To start tonight's interview, here's John Burroughs.
Thanks, Race. Larry and Peter, I want to thank you for coming on the show tonight. Larry, let's take this and make this a nostalgic trip. And what I mean by that is let's go back in time to the day of the incident when you went out in the forest for, the first time.
Yeah.
Can you tell me, do you remember, first of all, because there's been a lot of discrepancies even with the Halt memo on the dates and everything else. Do you remember what shift you came on that night, what day it was and such? Can we start with that?
Yeah, it was D-Flight, and I'm thinking it was, I never knew the exact day nowadays, or even then. I mean, it was a Sunday. I think there was a lot of things shut down that day during the day before the shift start, because England used to be that way. Everything was shut down on a Sunday.
Right. And do you remember then? There's a picture that you guys posted a while back. Go through that day. When you got up, the whole scenariyo with what you were doing, then into the evening, when exactly you got recalled and everything else.
Yeah. I've been transitioning onto flight. So that day, we had the day off, and a guy named Jimmy Harper, had a car, and we were going to go to Ipswich. He was going to drive myself and two other guys, and I needed a camera, and I went to the PX and bought a Keystone 110 Instamatic camera. And I bought that. I don't remember how much it cost, and as we were leaving the base, I took a picture just of and this is the main entrance with the alert signs and all that. I just turned and just took a picture, just testing the camera. And just to get a shot of it, I'd send pictures home or whatever, or plan to. And we left. We went down. We went across through Woodbridge. He was taking us not to Ipswich, but to the free bus they used to have off Woodbridge. On the main entrance to Woodbridge. So we went through the back gate where everything had happened, which I wasn't aware of at that point. And I stopped, and as we're driving out the window, I took another picture at the east end of Woodbridge Field, and that's a controversial picture too. But I didn't even notice the A-10 in the picture. I just took the picture, just testing the camera, winding it up. Went in. I was looking for musical equipment, and that's why. It must have been the place we went to was shut down in Ipswich, the music store. We came back, and we're late. The bus only went so far. We had to walk. We stopped at the Cherry Tree because I had to work that night. Stopped at the Cherry Tree, got a soft drink. If you recall that place, there was a little billiards table in there at those days. And continued on foot. There was a car parked up. There was a guy out that said he had seen some jet fly over very low, and it kind of startled him. We just kept going. They never got a ride from him. Got back on base, did our ironing, and which I think I borrowed my roommates, and got our alert bag. And by whatever time we went out there at that point, got dinner, I think, at the Chow Hall, and then got to the main movie theater the theater on our base, where the bus would pick you up if you lived on base and take you out to the Bentwaters Flight 9 to CSC. And that's where we would have guard mount. And that's how my night began on the night, in question.
When you came on duty that night, was there any talk about stuff that had happened the nights prior to that, or were you aware of anything that was going on?
Absolutely nothing. And I would have been interested in that, but not one word, nothing was said in guard mount. Bob Ball was there. There was nothing that I picked up at all. I was more worried about, getting on the post, and I was rather new to it. So there was no talk of UFOs or anything that happened to you guys at all. Even during the days, there was nothing that I heard.
Okay, and there was no radio traffic, like something was actually taking place at that time when you came on?
Not at that point, because once we had the radios, we're out on the post, P18 or whatever it was, and that's when the lights are back was the statement, and that must have been the Speak-Ats Tower in the WSA.
Okay. How did you get posted on that post that night? Because it's not a normal post. I mean, that wasn't something that security manned during normal times.
No, I know, and they said it was an alert post, and that's where I was. How I got posted, I don't know, and why, but I was put there and dropped off. I wasn't told to walk there, and that's where I was plunked and just sat there. It was all sandbagged up at that time, and that's when I saw these deer come, and our fence were lower then, if you remember. They're not like you'd find them now even. And
to clarify, and I don't want me to interrupt you, but people need to understand, you were at Bentwaters at that point. You weren't over at Woodbridge.
No, I wasn't at Woodbridge. I never worked on Woodbridge. I just had the classes there, the 2 weeks incoming classes.
Okay. So the PP post they put you on was at Bentwaters. Did they tell you to look for anything or to be on alert for anything, or they just said, here's your post and go?
No. They said, be on alert for any unusual activity on the fence, anything like that. I thought that was standard, SOP, That's what I thought. And all I saw was some deer, those jack deer come, and some of them, they could jump those fences back then. And I called that in. They had airfield maintenance came looking for these deer. 2 of them or 3 of them came over and just ran across. We had rabbits, as you know, and then these deer just crossed the runway. There were no planes landing. There was nothing. And I would have been right under coming down onto the runway. But no. And then they started to say, those lights are back again.
Okay.
And I didn't know where or what.
All right. And then what happened from there?
Well, from there, after, not too long, I was called. Someone also they were looking for the CO or whatever. I remember that, and no names. And I was told I was going to be picked up on my post, probably, maybe it was midnight, I don't know, at half midnight, and picked up on my post, pickup trucks that we had, and that was Lieutenant England and Bruce in the passenger side, 2 other individuals in the back already. Adrian was driving. And Busty was driving and grabbed me, and we went to the motor pool on Bentwaters, which was just, I was right on the road, the circular road then, and we just went right up to the motor pool, and that's where they were doing light-alls, gassing them up, which I'd never worked with a light-all or anything.
Right.
And then from that point was some weirdness with gauges, and I just remember there was tension. There was the talk about the lights in the sky. I didn't see anything. I didn't know even what direction to look at. What most people don't know, I didn't know that the name of those woods was Rendlesham Forest. I mean, it was just not, it was the woods. I personally never knew its name then. It wasn't issued to us. And then we went down to the main gate of Bentwaters. Then from there, cut out through I think Friday Street, just before Ike, went through there and then got to the east end of Woodbridge Field where there was a civvy car stopped. We went down further, and I wish Smitty had stayed on because I think they were the guys that told us where to go. Okay. Because Bruce yelled, "Where the hell are we?" Some other word, "Where are we going?" and all. And right. Then into the woods. And there was a lot of activity there. But I would love to address the news of the world stuff. Linda was.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that because I want to get through this whole thing, and then we'll get into
so disappointed.
Well, no, that's fine. Now, okay, so now you're in the forest. Now, here's a big thing that's never been established. Do you remember, because you live over there now, you've been in that forest probably more than most of us have. Do you remember exactly where they set up the intercontrol point and the command center for the incident that night? And who was there when you got there with the light-alls?
Okay, when we got up there were light-alls already there. They were just sitting. There was L.E. Carr. There was the guys on the end of the Eastgate Road, which I think might have been Smith, in his bunch. I didn't know who it was then. And in that, we got up to a circular area, which still exists. You and I walked through there. But I did not know, and there was a campsite at all. So I didn't see a big control center. I just saw a lot of security people and police. And I do think at one point, Halt came up from one of the access trails. Of course, the forest is very different now. And went to Bruce, and they walked off. And at that point, yeah.
Okay, now what if you had to look at the forest, you know how you break it up? You take the center Eastgate Road. You can go left towards Bentwaters, right out towards Capitol Green. Where were you taking that center road? Where exactly was the ECP when and where the people were all congregated at that point?
Okay, right. The only road that still exists that I'm aware of from those days, which looked very different, it was a dirt track, was the road that you can still walk up and head right to Capel Green. You can't drive out to it or on it or near it. At that time, it was the middle of the night. I didn't know there were fences in the woods at that time. I've been told that since. And it was before the campsite, the turnoff before what I now know is a campsite further down. I don't know if it was a campsite even then. Must have been, I guess.
Well, it was really small. It wasn't built up like today, so.
No. But I didn't know there was one. And we turned in there, and I imagine the Forestry Commission was down that way. And we faced kind of parked right in kind of a depression on the ground. And I know Halt came up, I have no doubt now, and grabbed Bruce. And I asked Charles if he wore glasses at night back at that time. He didn't answer me. I maybe did, maybe didn't. And if he needed night vision glasses, regular aviator type things. Right. And he didn't answer me, but there's someone I feel was Chuck. And Adrian was there and all that. There was law enforcement car, and that was probably Chris. I did see you. You can't miss you. And but no idea what was going on at all. I truly thought this was an exercise, just a readiness thing.
Okay, so from that point, what happened? I mean, there's the light-alls. Did they move the light-alls farther in?
No, they just stayed right, and they never could move them. They just stayed as far as anything can go, and I never saw anything lit up or started.
Okay, so then what happened? Once you were there, the light-alls were there, you got out of the vehicle. England took off with Colonel Halt. What happened?
I think he did. It was Halt he went with. And I was with Buzz and a few other guys. There were other people. We had our flashlights, no weapons. We went through the woods, and we broke left, and so into the woods. We didn't go straight down that road toward the field like you think you could, but I guess there might have been a fence from what someone tells me. I wouldn't have seen it. It was too dark. But no vehicles got down near the field at all, and that's never been said by me or anyone because you couldn't do it.
Right.
And I think that's as far as anyone could go. And we went through, and I kept hearing on the radio about hotspots in October 1, whoever that was, that call sign. And there was only one radio with us, and that was Buzz, his going. And we'd stop, we'd go, and off to about 100 yards through the trees, which were you could see through them back then, as you know, much better than nowadays. There wasn't all the low stuff on the ground. You could see activity, and I think that was them at the trees, looking at the marks on the trees, as you hear on the audio tape, at a distance. But you could see there was activity going on, and it wasn't campers or, anything like that. And a lot of the stuff you hear on the whole tape was, I heard directly over the radios anyway, which you probably did too. And we got to a place where there was a giant tree which opened up into the field. There was a barbed wire fence with about 2 strands that had been pushed down, not like nowadays.
Right.
And a slight hill. There was not, when I say a hill, there was a small rise. That's where they plow the field, and that's where the excess dirt goes. So that's my version of a hill. Just a slight hump, and then broken down ferns and all, and then this field, this grass field. There was no crop or anything like that. And that's where the stuff, I saw cameras.
This is something that, I contested, and then Jimmy Church brought it up to me. I didn't even think about it at the time because I was thinking about these big movie cameras, that they use to film shows and stuff. Well, what he brought up, and then I remembered as a kid, and my parents had it, they had these smaller little movie cameras, where you have the big bright light, you could hold away from it. What type of cameras were there? What can you describe the different types of cameras and who was there and what they were doing?
Well, there were two of those guys, and one of the cameras looked like the TV news had back then, so they could put them on their shoulder. And I'm told her public affairs, though I don't think that's who it was, had that type of a thing. If you look at television news cameras circa 1980, when they're on a location filming, they look kind of boxy and weird, but they're shoulder mounted. You put them on your shoulder. They weren't like the big Hollywood rolling on something. That's absolutely not what I saw. And what I would say was a movie, a motion picture camera, Mm-hmm. I don't know what speed it was, what the size of the film stock. I wasn't familiar with cameras really, but I saw them there. And over to the right, and there were flashes from actual, handheld cameras. I didn't have my camera with me. I wish I did. And that went on. But that feeling out there, John, was, and I've tried to describe it for years and years, was that kind of slowed down kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
Half speed, and I've been on record from day one, and it's no one can tell you this. You'd have to experience that, and this kind of, just a little half out of yourself, kind of observing something, and that's only out toward that field.
Right. And it's still there today sometimes. Now, okay, You got the cameras there. What are they filming? What's going on? Describe exactly.
Yeah, on the ground, and I can't wait to deal with the news of the world. It's good to get these things, because things become myth over the years, and people get disappointed with the truth and facts of the matter. But what I saw on the ground was a mist, nothing circular like the news of the world alleges. I saw a fog on the ground. Okay. And
all right, and I want to set the stage now. Who was with you at that moment? Who was with you? What group of people were with you that were observing the same things? Do you remember?
Oh yeah, Bastenza, Bob Ball was there. Down the list of everyone that was, a lot of names that have come up over the years, but no Charles Halt. His what's his name there? The disaster preparedness, Neville's. And all that. None of them were there. Bruce England was not there, so this is why I assume they were across the field.
Okay.
But when you hear that red light start coming in on the audio, now this mist on the ground was about a foot in height. Now people, and it was a foggy thing, but it had definition to it, so it was like contained mist on the ground. I can't describe, but people have turned it into a saucer and whatever. It wasn't anything like that.
Right.
And a yellowish green, you could see through it. Off left, to the right, and to the left, there was that farmer's house, and it did have a light on the upper deck, the upper floor. I knew there was a house there. I didn't know what it was at that time. And off to the south of it, next you would have the Orford Lighthouse. I never noticed the lighthouse or anything. Never knew a lighthouse was there or 6 miles away. Just no idea about any of that. And just south of that, away, so it's not even the direction of the Orford Lighthouse, was a small red light, just like Halt describes on the tape. And they're seeing it through the trees. Well, this is in the field, beyond the trees, out toward the sea. Comes in an amber thing, like a basketball. It's the only way to describe it, same color. Gets above this mist on the ground, about 30, 50 feet, I don't know. And it just came right in, and just boom, there was a flash. Now, silent, bright, caused damage to my eyes that it documented, probably did a lot to everybody. And that, in its place, I mean, it was that quick, was not a structured machine that I thought had people in it. So I hope we do deal with the or beings in it. How would anyone? That would be an assumption.
Well, right, and let me break in on that because we'll go to the News of the World in a few minutes. But the interesting thing was, I noticed in the News of the World, what you told them was that you didn't see the beings, you were told there were beings in there, okay? And one of the things that I picked up when Chuck DeCaro did his interview with the people, the first series that he did, it was the first series done on it, Master Sergeant Ball, who was out there, said he saw what could have been a being inside the blue light.
Yeah.
So if you're saying that Sergeant Ball was there, I'm wondering if he's referencing at that point, because what was clear in the interview that was done with News of the World was you didn't actually say you saw beings, but that you were there and there were people around it and people on the other side of it saw the beings.
Well, you're going to be shocked at this when, and that's coming to how all this came out.
Okay.
But I never spoke to the News of the World.
Okay, all right. Well, let's get to that. But okay, now we're at the point where it exploded. Now, what exactly happened when it exploded?
Well, I describe it as an explosion, a flash of light or whatever, very controlled in a shape. And in its shape was a triangle, exactly like that photograph I took earlier in the day, which took 34 years to find it out, a delta shape, continually changing object that rose to a point about 15 feet, 20 feet, and spread out. It was not little. Okay. It was not black, and it was white like snow, with changing, and you could see it just eternally changed and changed. It's not like people try to make these things into a structured science fiction movie kind of thing. Right. And that's the problem with all this stuff, and probably describing the stuff. It just becomes this. And that was truly just, if you ever felt like standing outside of yourself, that was it. That's when I thought Buzz said to me, because even everything sounded like a whisper, some people backed off. There were people right there, and it wasn't like handshakes. Now, I say at certain point, those cameras did film this thing. Okay, and they were behind you, right? No, they were off to the right. Off to the right of you, okay. And there was how many cameras? Do you remember? 2, 3, what? Two motion cameras. Okay, and with it, how many people were with those cameras? Were the bobbies there? What was going on? 2 guys. Now the bobbies, that they came up with a still camera, just a flash. Okay, regular. All right, okay. All right. So now we're at this thing. It exploded. Go into great detail. And what did you see? You saw it changing and everything else. Was there any blue lights in it? What else was there? Absolutely. What happened is, off the thing, like you blow a bubble, no doors open, no nothing. Like you blow a bubble, and this thing just separated off it, sat there in the air, about a foot off the ground, split up into more blue lights, bluish gold lights, and then it got very intense and faded, and it was right there. And within it, there were faces and like things, and silver suits. I don't know. It was very shiny and bright, but there were. I'm not saying there were silver suits. I'm saying that it's fun to run with these things in the News of the World. Right. What it was bright bluish gold lights off the ground, like an aspirin, or a capsule. Right? Okay. You can describe it in that kind of rough. Or like a spear or something like that? Yeah, a little less than that, and it's similar, but individual, with movement within it, and with what I saw as faces, and something within it. All right, and then what happened? What happened? Was there, you had said, did you, actually, let me rephrase this, did you ever say there was a communications between the guy in charge there, which you identified as Colonel Williams, and it would have been the wing commander? Was there some kind of an interaction that went on? Well, that's the better word. I've never said there was a communication with. Okay. I've seen the hand signals and the exchange of cookies and all that. Never said that. I said, and I still stand with Williams going out there, but and he would, wouldn't he? I mean, you wouldn't just keep celebrating Christmas, but at the end of the day, if there was communication, it would have been the telepathic. There would have been a mental thing, and there was a reason something was going on there with that interaction. And it wasn't just us and others. there was an interaction. I remember those cops got all freaky and weird, and the locals. There weren't British military. No one ever said that, so that sounded good. You'd have to understand how the news of the world pulled here. You'll find it interesting. But this is the problem when you whistleblower or whatever, is particularly on the subject, particularly back in the beginning of the 80s. Oh boy, send in the
right. So now this interaction, and I'm not trying to. I just want to know: did you feel like there was ever some kind of interaction with you, like you were pulling toward it or anything like that?
Well, I didn't feel that special with it. I was kind of disturbed when Buzz said that there were 3 things around me, and why I didn't say they were around him. But fair play. I didn't like that. I didn't like hearing that. But I felt there was a feeling of some kind of interaction with this. I didn't have one. I felt totally separate from my body, like I was watching a movie.
Okay.
That's how I felt on site. And you know what? This goes on. You can tell me how much time went on, because there was a lot behind going on and over to the left in the field going on. But you just narrowcast right on what's happening here. So that was how it affected me. Okay. And when I was told by Robert to leave, myself and a couple other guys, Buzz stayed. He stayed there. We left.
Now, let's set the stage real fast. This was all still going on when you were told to leave?
Yeah, I looked back over my shoulder. When I headed back, you were still back at you were still in the back line. You weren't.
Okay.
And Adrian was still up there. So I left. But my problem now, and that came out from doing that show with you, the declassified one on, I forget what its name is. But that's where it came out. I'm like, I wrote that in the book. I remember going back to the parking area, I guess. Kinda, and then I don't recall. And it's dark. It's nighttime. It's early in the morning. My next real recall is CSC, Central Security Control, and someone asked me, "How'd you deal with that in the book?" I said, "Geez, I don't know. Maybe I just couldn't account and just skipped over it. Like you just assume." Someone said you took a bus back. I said there wouldn't have been a bus to take. I just don't remember it. There is a gap for me there, and I think not just with me, with others. And I went back. We went through CSC. There were the people making fun at that point for the A flight, the day shift. And see, there was a big gap there because the day shift's coming on too. That doesn't make sense.
Okay.
And about Little Green Man and all that. And off to the dorm I went. And I felt very ill. I had a metallic taste in my mouth, for sure. The eyes were watering. And I was just totally stone cold in shock. And the first thing I wanted to do, I find I'm not the only one that did this, is I went to the chow hall. I wasn't pulled in for any debrief. I went over to the chow hall, and Jim Peniston was at the end of the table. Longero's across from me.
Now, question really fast, because this is kind of important to understand. Yeah. What time do you remember it being? Was it like light then, like 7 something in the morning, or what?
Yeah, this would have been about 9 a.m. in the morning.
Okay, keep going.
Maybe 8 o'clock, 9. Right. I would have gotten back to the dorm, still in my uniform on, and walked over. It wasn't contained. No one spoke to me. Nothing. No statements. The only statement I did was pre-written thing that they just said, "Dude, sign it," and it was saying we were off duty. That was in Ziegler's office, not an alien underground base on duty.
Well, right, but after you met Peniston, what happened?
Well, Jim was at the end of the table, and I knew who he was. And somebody at the table said, "What the F just happened to us?" And Jim, he verified it. He said, "Warren, shut the F up."
Right.
And I got flaming mad at that. But, I didn't really know what was going on. So what I did, me and Battram, I somehow left the chow hall, finished whatever happened, and I went to that phone box just outside it. Right. You remember that?
I remember. I used it.
And that's where I went, because they had the Audubon system where I thought I was so clever at that age, which I wasn't, but we had that system where you could have a free call home, wasn't it? You had to go to the club or something and sit in that box, and once a week, I don't know, it was like being in prison. So I got on the red phone. The British public phone, and I called my mother. I took Greg with me. I said, "Come with me. I'm calling my mother." And I called her up, and it was, 5 hours difference. Her friend Sue and her stayed up all hours. So I'm thinking it's a weekend, because my mother works, Sue works. So I just don't know why they'd be up at that hour. So anyway, my mother answered the phone. I reversed the charges because I didn't have the coin for it. And I said, Ma, you won't believe a UFO landed near the base. And I just went on, and she wasn't there. So I called back thinking I got cut off. And the operator said, are you calling from the base? And I said, yes. And she said, you were cut off at the base. And I went, oh, boy. And that's where it really kicked off. Later in the day, and I understand where Buzz was on that radio show that we all did. Later in the day, and about taking stories and all, let's address that and what it's about.
We will. Well, let's go what happened next, because this is kind of important, because I'm trying to make this out. Did you guys go back to work after that, or were you off for 3 days?
I did not go back to work, and I never went back on flight. I worked in the back line with.
So after that incident happened, you didn't go back to work at all.
I never went I was always a cop. I left there
right. I got that, but you didn't go back on duty on flight. Okay. So what happened? Never. What happened? All right. What happened from that point, later that day? You were right at that point. Let's talk about that.
All right. Well, later that day, I went back, I put a record on. I remember that. And I remember my roommate, there still were no rumors, because I lived in the dorms. Busty lived 2 buildings away from me. In second floor 2, I think. And I don't remember a lot of the day itself, but in the afternoon, the day room, a guy ran up from the phone down there. There was the phone in the dorms down the stairs in the day room, they called it, and came up and said, you've got to go over to Ziegler's office sometime in the afternoon. Maybe it was about 2 in the afternoon. And I got over there at whatever time it was, and there were a number of guys around. There were suits there, plain clothes, not in an underground base anywhere. And when I do that, John, it's throwing it at people that just, details are too much for them, and they just
right.
Forgive me. But so we got there, and these guys, there were some definitely heavies. Now, in the law enforcement desk, which is that primitive old building they had back then, with a couple jail cells, I think, and that desk just as you walked in Ziegler's office was to the right. And he was there, and first of all, they checked out some guys with what I would expect is a Geiger counter, and it was not Monroe Neville's doing it. They weren't from the base. This is my experience. Okay. Bustinza wasn't there. It was low ranks. We went in, sat down first of all, we signed our statements. You got all you guys the first night. But everyone had to sign these pre-written things saying we were off. We saw lights and were off duty, and a few other things, and we weren't allowed to question them. We just signed them. They were on the LE desk, and even the controllers were not there at that moment. And so everything that went on next with me was in Ziegler's office. It was not in a base under the Earth or whatever on Mars. And that's where the Navy spoke to us, and that was Armed Forces Security Services, and then ONI. And ONI was the people that talked to me. This guy Richardson, and we know he was running London ONI now at that time. And that was a uniformed Navy guy. And it was all, I've depicted it pretty well. It was everything and nothing. And that's when the bullets were cheap was also said. It wasn't Ziegler saying it. It was this debriefer saying it to us. So I'm sure it was said to a number of people, but that was said to us. Someone said, what happens if we say anything about that? Number one, it was about the mail, about talking on base, the rumors. So you're not going to run around and do it. And there might have been people that knew certain things, but I never heard a big rumor. In fact, I never saw people shut down so quick about this stuff than after that point, because little things would come up and I wouldn't even seek out anyone else. We'd look at each other and just go separate ways until Buzz and I sat down, and it wasn't my doing. That was his girlfriend sending a note under my door. His girlfriend at that time, and went upset his wife, or friend, Cindy Schultz was her name. And it got very dark, though I have to say, I wrote a letter to my mother a few days later, describing amazingly what happened to you guys, which you'd be shocked at because that whole letter has not been released, and I wish something would get done with it soon, is that how did we know that? Well, that's what they told us had happened and why we all responded. And that's why in the early days, I thought all this must have happened on one night. And like your thing happened with Jim and Eddie, and then we came out to deal with that or secure it or whatever. It just made sense to me because I thought it's impossible this could go on all those nights and not know about it. And that's how I felt. So early on, until the Halt memo, we got it out, I really thought this had to be on one night. It just could not have been three. It just didn't make sense to me, but it was.
Okay.
So much for what I know. And boom, in the end, a lot went on. I worked in the SP Supply with Smith and Fred Smith and George Laws. Then we had a guy popped in there, Mark Reese, who was OSI, it turned out. Apparently some guys, King Kearns and all that, they all knew he was AFOSI. They've told me since. A guy popped in, and he just didn't seem in place, staff sergeant. And
he worked in the oiler room. I know who he was.
Yeah, and we had just a little sharp for me, but we had a few conversations, and he wasn't even on base when that happened, but he had a very calm kind of demeanor about it, saying, what can you do about it, and just, move. It was just too weird, Right. It was weird. Everything was weird, as you know, and you'd lived off the base, but even on it, it was just paranoia and bizarreness and weirdness, and then I worked for not Ziegler, what's his counterpart there, Drury. I was in the back line, and that's when I saw Bonnie Tamplin, Lieutenant Tamplin.
Okay.
Go crazy and really just refuse to work. I was there when that happened.
Where did that happen?
That happened right in Drury's office, which was a separate building, if you recall, from Ziegler's.
Right.
And I was having to do something with files for him, full police, but I think it was just keep an eye on Larry or whoever. Well, I called my mother. So I got in trouble for that, by the way, instantly. And fined, and they even were chasing me up to 1986 for that fine. But I said, tell me what I got it for. But Tamplin came in, and I knew her, and who she was. Right. And they started screaming about her roster. She was not going to, she's a few expletives, was not going out again at night to those damn woods. And, or on a night shift at all. And they started screaming. You know how he was. And there was a big argument ensued. I had no place to be there for it. And he told me to get the F out of the office, which I did. But I always hear people talk about Lieutenant Tamplin, how upset. I watched it happen. I didn't know why, and I didn't know what happened to her, because I didn't see her on those nights, on that night at all. But I definitely knew she was, and it makes sense now. It was right after it. Okay. So I literally did see her reaction to clearly what people claim happened to her and how upset she was. Okay. And that was pretty unnerving. Right. It made me kind of hate the place a little bit at that point.
I gotcha.
So I get it.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's your show. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, after that, I mean, you went ahead and got out of the Air Force, and then now we can get into you got out, what you decided to do, how you decided to do it, and on the news in the world, if you're ready. If there's something you want to add that happened there before you left.
Why I got out, I was advised by a guy named Colonel Persky, the base lawyer. I did not feel safe there. I was getting my doors brought in every day. They were pulling the plume in, scaring him so much, saying I'd just gone to Amsterdam, God knows what I had on me, and, whatever. I just felt I was going to get dope planted on me or something weird, because, again, I had identified myself as a problem, calling my mother. Right. And they knew that. They caught that right off, and I did get in trouble with that. It's another thing. But so I, keep an eye on me. It just things make sense now. Back then when I was younger, none of it did. So the main thing is I went and I said, I want to get off this base. Didn't want to get out of the Air Force. I wanted to get out of the base. And I got kind of spun around because my RE code doesn't exist on any books. Halt knows that, all down the line. And what it was a breach of contract. I wasn't on the flight line. I was working in offices with the security police. Therefore, I fought, and it was done so easily. Come on. And I was given a breach of contract on the Air Force's part discharge. I wasn't thrown out, fully honorable, but they snuck in a little code that meant I could never come back, and it had nothing to do with medical or anything. It was a breach of contract, and the person that handled it was none other than Gordon Williams. And the wing commander does not handle Airman Know-Nothing discharges, but he did handle mine and approved it and et cetera. And that was kind of odd, and I've heard from other Air Force officers that would be very non-standard. But I have all the paperwork because when I had to carry it to CBPO, for the out processing, John, I truly expected to get out. I had letters from my friends and my dad's and all saying the economy's bad in the States. You might want to really think. And I said, you know what? I'll get out. I'll come back in and go into law enforcement, your end. And I just won't come back to this base. This is my head was at. And right. I got out. And once I pursued, I said, wow, the economy is bad. Well, lo and behold, though our phones were tapped at home, my family didn't know any of this except we had people on our lines. They thought that was odd. And why did I get out so quick? Next thing I know, I couldn't get back in. And it wasn't for a bad discharge. It was simply a reenlistment code that said, do not process, nothing followed. And it went higher than that. And eventually I had to get my congressman involved, Gerald Solomon, who's deceased now. And there was just horrific times. So we moved, I moved forward, but I did sit with Adrian in March of 81. I see Buzz. He was a great guy and all this stuff, but I got a note. Busty wants to talk to you. I don't think Cindy knew what the hell he wanted. So I went over and we sat and talked down. And what it was not, I'll tell your story. It was that one or the other will get this out. I mean, we truly did sincerely want to, back then you thought the newspapers, right? That's the mindset. How naive was I? Ridiculous. Left the Air Force. I had a few numbers for some people, David Payne, a few guys, but they faded over the years. And come 1982, I'm down in Connecticut, and this is how it all came out, really. I was bothered with it, and I didn't tell my family much. My mother didn't run a really, I went into it a bit, but it was, that sounds terrible, and just moved on. Everyone reacts different. I told one friend of mine, Harold, about it, what happened, and that was in June of 81, after I got out. And again, folks, this was unknown. This wasn't known to anybody, this thing. And the UFO world was, I guess, totally different then. I had no desire to be in the public eye with this stuff, I had no idea any of this would come out. And so all Adrian and I decided to do is that we would tell this and get it out. Now, I've seen things get all shifted around through the years, and bless his heart, he's come out and made as much statement as he cares to, and that's cool. There was a lot of intervention on some of us after that on that base with dope and tactics and things, bad. And I look back at it now, and I see in 82, man, I was going out of my head with this, for some reason, but it all happened by accident. I went to buy cigarettes one night, and I was staying at my dad's house. I was out of my head, man. I was just PTSD'd out of the tree. And so I lived with my dad, was working, starting school, university, and broadcasting school. And I went to get cigarettes, and I went down, and there was Omni magazine on the newsstand, and I never read it at all. I wasn't into sci-fi or any of that. And I just picked it up, went to the center, and they had it, UFO Updates, this little thing, and it said, on December 30th, 1980, it's alleged that a blah, 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 our thing, right? And I'm like, I can't believe this. It's out, because there were rumors in England, and it all come through Jenny Randall's, the rumors. Well, they ain't whistleblowers. Whistleblowers, when you live it and you put your life on the railroad track, or like yourself or anyone, you have to live it to really be part of it. And I took this home, and I remember showing my father's wife. I go, you won't believe this here. I think I might have told them about it then. It was real hard telling my old man, and he believed it. He saw all the stuff going on with me. It's a lot of it. Everything in our book is true as far as all that stuff and life, how it unfolded. That's the true thing, how it all came out. And I saw that. No, in fact, that came later. Strike that. I saw an article in the Hartford Courant newspaper, broadsheet, and it was about a couple in Cheshire, Connecticut. I had just had oral surgery, and it talked about a guy named Robert Luca and his wife, Betty Andreasen. I never heard of them, and they were popular in ufology at that, she had experiences, and Raymond Fowler, the author, had written one book about them, the Andreasen Affair, and they happened to be in the town next to me, and they listed where he worked, which is Middletown Toyota, as a mechanic. I just went and got the number, and I called them, Bob just recently said they were the first people I went to, and they interviewed me. And that tape was just given to me. They actually sat down in their living room. I sat with them a few days later. I went through what I was willing to do. Now, as far as life form, beings, whatever, I did hold that back. This is 1982. I mean, back then, you go to a MUFON meeting or something. I mean, literally, they just talked about lights in the sky. But Hopkins was new to that, the mainstream, all that. It was all new. And you'd just hang yourself. It was suicide. And I wanted other people to come out. So they said, well, we know somebody that does Freedom of Information Act requests, which I had never heard of. A guy named Larry Fawcett, who was a policeman, lieutenant up in Coventry, Connecticut. And I said, oh, yeah, well, he'll never get anything, but I feel better for talking to somebody about this that at least doesn't think I have three heads. And sure enough, a couple of weeks later, or January of 83, I sat down with Larry Fawcett, Bob and Betty, and Larry's wife Lois at a restaurant. And he said, well, if something really happened, because we might be able to track it down. I said, good luck. Gave him all the approximate dates before Christmas, after Christmas, before New Year is all I knew. And blah, 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 numerous denials. And there's a great document of that in our book on how the denials came and came and came. And then finally, and there wasn't much more to do with it. I gave Larry the names of Buzz, a number of other people. I think yours too, John. And these were these early calls with Boucher and all that from those days, so long ago. And one day, Larry, out came the Halt memo. And that, I couldn't believe it. I got a phone call one day by Larry. And he said, Larry, we got him. You won't believe it. We've got a document verifying this stuff happened. You were right. And I'm like, well, I can't believe this. I have to see it. And then I remember, when I finally saw that document, I said, oh, Colonel Halt, he's a pretty cool guy, if I remember. He was really good to the police. He wasn't all ate up. Do you remember that expression? He was a nice guy, for running the base. He seemed always very pleasant to me, and found me in a refrigerator and didn't have me put in Devil's Island or anything, which is a true story, actually did. Right. But probably shouldn't go there, but... And this document came out, and that really kicked it open, and that was June of 83. Now, I recall, and this is before the British got involved, and this is where some embarrassing, not on my part, others. I was very guarded, extraordinarily. I just wanted other people to come out, but I didn't know how to reach anyone or find anyone. I'd pretty much given up trying to get back in the military. I knew my records were sat down on and classified, packed in. I knew it. We were told it. And I was pretty fed up with all of it, felt pretty betrayed. Well, the next thing I know, Larry tells me there's these people in England, Jenny Randalls, etc., that have been looking into the rumors of this, and we're going to send them the Halt memo to assist in their research. And they did so. Great. I don't own it. I do recall the National Enquirer. See, this was kicking in America long before the News of the World or England. And the National Enquirer contacted me. Peter, you remember that what's his name? Mike Luckman?
Yes, exactly.
Oh, yes. And rest his heart, he's not with us. But this guy from nowhere, I don't know how he found my number. He called me and said, I can get us $5,000 for that document. And for the National Enquirer. And, I'm a young guy. I'm thinking, there's a motorcycle in them hills or something. And, you're thinking that. My old man, I said, I can get some money for this. And he goes, is your name on it? And I'll never thank my dad always for that. And I said, no. And he goes, I think if you sold that for anything, you're going to regret it. And I didn't. And so Mike Luckman did, and to the News of the World. Now, this is where a lot of selling goes on. It was sent to England. you had Dot Street and Brenda Butler, local researchers, have been looking into it from right about the beginning, because they hung around the base. They lived in the area in Leaston. And we sent it to them. Well, one morning, I got a call from Barry Greenwood, and he said, a reporter named Keith Beebe would like to speak to you, because this is broken in the UK. And I'm like, what? And the News of the World, I kept thinking, I kept thinking the Page 3 girls and all that, but that was the Sun. Right. And I said, isn't that a rag? That was kind of a trashy kind of newspaper. And I didn't think much more of it than that. I spoke to Keith very briefly. He got on. He said, what's your real name? And I said, I'm not going to tell you my real name until others verify, this. And I said, and he said, well, he goes, we're having a front page thing come out Sunday with the document. And he goes, and I want to do an interview with you. I said, I'm not going to do an interview until other people do the same. And with anybody, I said, because I'm not going to do this. And so my extent of a conversation with Keith Beebe was him trying to find out what my real name was, which I think I slipped up and said it twice. And I didn't even coin that. It was done Barry Greenwood did that. Clear Intent had come out, and the Halt member was in it. His first book Rendlesham was ever in, was in Clear Intent. And in that book, Barry just made up a name. I didn't say make up a name. He did it. And I just didn't want my name used. I've never used a fake name. The Japs tried it with me over there, and they said, well, listen. I said, look, it's Larry Warren. Enough of this circus. But, and so out came the memo, and why it got to the News of the World, sadly, is that an attorney out of Manchester named Harry Harris sold it to them for 25,000 1983 UK pounds. And that money was distributed to one firm or another around the little team in England. That was on the early days of it. Tough times, fine. But, I never took a penny from any of that. And, but it was sold on our blood.
And on that note,
so I didn't do an interview with them at all. So those pieces and bits and pieces where I talked to the guy, he never called me back because I wouldn't let him use my real name. So all those things were bits and pieces twisted out of, wishful thinking and partial statements given to Larry Fawcett that he sent over to the team in England. And that was when I first should have walked.
Okay, I agree. When we come back, we'll go into that a little bit more. Then we'll bring Peter in because we want to talk about what you did after that and how to move forward. Okay, Larry?
You bet.
All right, good.
Thank you, John. And that wraps up the first hour of tonight's interview with special guests Larry Warren and Peter Robbins. To find the latest on Larry and Peter, find them on Facebook and Twitter. Just search Larry Warren and Peter Robbins. Stay right there as we start hour 2 of tonight's program right after these messages from your choice for UFO Paranormal Talk Radio on the World Wide Web. We're KGRAradio.com, the planet. You're listening to the KGRA digital broadcast station, Van Buren, Arkansas, Sarasota, Florida. As we begin hour 2 of tonight's interview with Larry and Peter on Phenomenon Radio with John Burroughs and Linda Moulton Howe, I want to remind you to find Left at Eastgate on Amazon. Just go to Amazon.com, search Left at Eastgate, and you're all set. To begin the second half of tonight's show, here's John Burroughs.
Thanks, Race. Larry, when we went to break, you were talking a little bit about the News of the World and how that went down. And can you go ahead and finish that part, and we'll go from there?
Yeah. Like Linda was saying, there was a lot of quotes in it and this and that. And, it was a tabloid newspaper. If they couldn't get a story, they're going to build one. And they built one based on not me, but the person that was anonymous that turned out not being involved at all. That was Brenda Butler's source, and attributed it to me. I forget the name they used for that person who was not part of it. So there you go with the sad facts and all that. And there was a price put on it and all these things. But so that was tough, and it was a tabloid. That was not our choice in the States. We didn't seek them out or anything. Now, the other thing that happened with that Linda had mentioned, it comes up, often. It's addressed in the book Pete and I wrote, Left at Eastgate, in depth. is that now obviously people heard me and Bastinza on your show, John, and, going through, there was things I didn't remember that he was saying. But the one thing is, when we talked about it, we're going to get it out. In 1983, Larry Fawcett got a phone dialogue going with Adrian, who was out of the military, 83, early 84, I'm not sure what year. And I was there, and I kept saying, there is a part where some very strange, a chapter I didn't want to put in our book, with alleging an underground facility, an underground experience, an underground something, with some weird visuals to go with it. Now, I explored that. This is the tape that Charles Halt wanted from the estate of Bud Hopkins and got, where I just knew something just seemed so artificial and plugged in about all that science fiction scenario. And it was a very clinical, maybe psyops kind of thing, that's how it turns out on the tape. And I'm quite comfortable with that. But we put it in the book just to see if it would trip anyone else's mind. Now, I went through, and I think Adrian was trying to keep things away, like he said on the show, an awful lot. There's things I'm not ready to go into. I understand that, and I said as much. What I did, when Larry was interviewing Adrian, he asked about, and Adrian had details that I didn't recall or, that weren't clear to me. But that's fine. A great interview, very early interview, which is in Left at Eastgate, actually, in its entirety. But there was a part where I thought Adrian, now mind you, I'm very young. I was carrying this kind of my own at that point. It was getting out of my not control. It was too far out of my hands, and I didn't know what was going to happen to me, and my family were worried. And Larry asked about this underground thing, did he remember? And Adrian said, on the call, because I was there, it was on a speakerphone, he didn't know I was there. That's how they used to play things then. Don't let him know you're in the room. And Adrian said, oh, no, that happened to Larry. That wasn't me. And at that point, and call it hypersensitivity, at that point, I just said, nope, that was all Adrian. That wasn't me. Because at that point, I'm figuring, I'm out here trying to just deal with that we had unknowns in the forest. And then you've got this ultra, which I didn't explore at that point, ultra weird memory that didn't fit any of it, which was probably for the reason to say it. And very ultra weird experience. Well, I know who was with me in that black car and all that stuff. And I just said, well, hell with this. And I just threw it back his way. And it wasn't that I was mad at him. I've seen, I wasn't mad at him at all. I just didn't want the responsibility of all that weirdness. And because I was well into this, in the middle of this thing at that point. So the next thing that comes out, like I took Adrian's story. You couldn't have done it. No one could have physically done it. And obviously it's clear that that didn't happen. But what I did, I tried to throw that basket back on my friend's lap, which was not right. And by the time I spoke to Linda, which you mentioned at the intro, in 86, which was actually a very good interview I did with her, and Ben Jameson, who I've known since 1975, funny enough, is that I was still in that head. That's the thing. I took that part from Adrian, and by 86, I was still in that head. And I didn't want it. And I figured Adrian's never going to talk about it anyway, so I'll eat the wizard on that one and just make it go away. I should never have said anything, and that's what that was. Reality, I went right through that. I know who went through it with me, and that was a tape Mr. Halt was desperate to get a hold of and got a hold of.
Well, can you elaborate a little bit more? Because when we talked earlier, all you talked about was you went to Ziegler's office and signed a statement. What's this part that you're elaborating about a car and stuff? Can you go into that just short, real quickly for a couple?
Yeah. 5 o'clock that night, same night. Got a note from day room, meet this car outside. They were building the new housing at that time, so it was all this construction stuff in front of our dorm in the parking lot. And meet a government car. It's going to be out there, a military, whatever it was. And it was just a note. It came up under the door. They get them from the day room. No one told me it. Got a note. And we went out. I seen Buzz. We walked simultaneously, two different sides. He would have come down the road. I came up my steps. How you doing? The lights were just starting to pop on. And these guys, what they did, they came around from the stacks of construction, and there were these shots like an aerosol. Now, you could call that an exotic toxin or something, and I don't have any movement of it, movement from that point on. I could hear, and I knew there was a struggle on the other side of this vehicle. I could hear the flight line, or what I assume was the flight line, the A-10 line, as they're sitting there on that old sound we remember. And I remember at some point a feeling of descent. I remember my nose running profusely. See, it's very subjective memory. Now, in our book, it comes off, you're reading that, I don't know, you're probably reading that going, what the hell is this? It's like that Dusk Till Dawn, then it turns into this. Well, it's designed to, and I believe totally that memory. Yes, there were these red seats we sat in. There was somebody behind a screen thing. I've seen that turned into it was an alien or what. I don't know who it was or what. And everything was bizarre, and there's only about this and that moments of recall. But I put it in because it needed to, and I wanted to I thought other people would say things. It didn't work out that way. And in reality, I explored it in 96 or 5 with Bud, who I trusted. And Peter, you were there. And I'm not a fan of hypnosis. Don't know if I just don't know. But this did work on me because I don't remember the session and want to, as proof to me. And it was a very clinical situation where there were injections and things. And I think that was, they just grabbed certain people and they did things with. And that Halt concurs with that. And it was a very different thing than a science fiction scenario. I think it was a containment, plug in crazy stuff, over the top stuff, and then the real base of it is going to go away. But you remember that people are more open to things nowadays. But do I think there's an alien under the, but no. If there is, I probably wouldn't be surprised either. But it was a very clinical thing. But that's what it was, is that, certain people were also there, but there were some very dark things done, and I'm not going to push no one, and frankly I don't want to, because it does kind of take away from, we still got to get past the lighthouse idiots,
Well, right, but here's the interesting thing that I take out of that. With Peniston, when he did his hypnosis, I think it was in 96, or right around the same time frame you did, he comes out under hypnosis and said he was injected also. So now you've got yourself under hypnosis saying you were injected, and then you have him saying he was injected, and that's a very interesting thing to take out of this. What were they doing? Were they injecting you to find out what you knew, or were they injecting you to plant a story in you, or were they doing both?
I think they knew what we all knew. Just whoever they are, they weren't people we worked with, John, because they came into the base. Even in my letter to my mother, that aircraft coming in, that's fully described in the letter. I can't believe that, but it's there, totally authentic within days of it. And Hazeltine sees the value in that, as a copper looking at it, but the letter is so valuable to you guys as far as the night one, and why we do. They explain night one to us, that this has happened earlier. They didn't say aliens or anything like that. They never said it. Alien was never brought up in any of this, in debriefs or anything. Ever once. Never.
Now, under hypnosis, did you go in, because you said you realized you had stuff put in you, right? Did you go into why they did that, or was there any questions from them or anything else?
That's funny. I've never listened to it. Peter was there for it. And, the late Bud Hopkins was there. I always found hypnosis invasive, but Peter transcribed it fully in the book, minus some names that we kept out, and just for their privacy's sake, these people. And, well, sure enough, I don't recall anyone telling me anything. The one thing is in the Ziegler's office with that Richard, the Navy guy, was that it was off-Earth technology, and thus the need for secrecy. Now, I didn't know what the hell that meant at that time, or even now, or doesn't mean alien. But no, I don't have any recall or any answers for nothing. No one told me nothing what this is or what that was. Of course, I've had a lifetime of stuff before, so people would say, well, you got to discount him. But I find I'm not the only one of us that did. And I think there was a bigger program afoot. And I personally, in my gut, don't think this was an accident. I think a lot of us are there for a reason. And I think certain entities bodies, government body, whatever, had this all underway way before. And there were certain people meant to be near it. I don't know. It's just thoughts.
Right. I understand because I'm doing more research right now on some of the facilities over there and how that all ties in.
Great stuff.
Like I said, it's just interesting that you both, under hypnosis, it shows that you guys had something injected in you. Now, I understand the difference between pentothal and amythol, and Heseltine came out and said it's amythol, but Jim clearly said under hypnosis they put pentothal in it.
Yeah.
So, that's hard to say, but that's a facet that's important because why, and I'm not saying it didn't happen to the rest of us either. We just don't remember it. But why would they treat us that way? Why would they bring you in and put you under and do that? Were they, because to me, a lot of people say, well, they were just trying to plant a story in you. Well, why would they do that? There'd be no reason to plant a crazier story into this at all. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me because to me, they were trying to figure out what we encountered and more than, Halt likes to spin it and say you can't trust anything anybody says, basically because they were messed with. But it goes farther than me because I've always challenged him on this, saying, "Well, wait a minute, Colonel, you weren't talked to or debriefed and all that. You led a team out there. That's not possible." But we'll get into that in the last half an hour. Okay, so now now let's go forward. You use the world story breaks. What happens with you? And then you meet Peter, and what do you guys do from there?
It was a nightmare. I became a performing circus chimp on the UFO circuit. That was enjoyable. And my whole motive, in the early days, and my whole, I could see that, how UFO researchers of the day, and I met Alan Hynek a number of times, nothing against him, and Bud I met at that time. I met Peter briefly in Westchester. We were having the big overflights of triangles at that time. And I met Pete that day at the high school, wasn't it, in New York State. And then, but it'd be years before I'd see Peter again. And yeah, I was around. I started to see Larry Fawcett. You okay, come up, dancing monkey. In fact, Steve LaPlume and I both did a talk. And, I'm not kind of a guy that can be led by a chain for anyone, but that's what they did to their witnesses back then. And I walked from them. And for that reason, that's all. I just going to run it my own way. Or if not. And so, like every chapter in our book, for a point, which is embarrassing, I always say, I finally walked away. And the next chapter, I'm right back in it. Because it just never, ever stopped unfolding. So in 86, and I was married and all, and this just wasn't conducive to, family life or Pete life at all. And your friends, and I lost a job when I did the CNN, and I'm going to be on there without blackout and all this. And I called Williams a lieutenant or Halt something. I had the rank wrong, just came out. I had my father screaming from the back porch, "Don't let him film the goddamn house." And so that one. So who knew? It just kept getting more and more and more stuff coming out. And I started to think, what the hell have I got, really? What have I got myself into? And by 85 or 86, I met, I knew Whitley Strieber before Communion came out. And I said, man, I'm in all these books like Sky Crash and all these other things. And it's inaccurate. It's not what I said. It's not me, and it's not what I'm saying. And he said, write your own. As if you just go out and write your own book. So I said, well, there's an idea. I'll do that. So I came up with a title instantly at our kitchen table. And I had this guy, again, nice guy, I don't know, Bill, who was the old school ufologist, lights in the sky kind of guy. He was interested in the co-author thing. It just wasn't going to work for me. I needed someone that had had some sort of first-hand knowledge of this phenomena, one way or another. And so that's what I was thinking of. And sure enough, I'm doing the DC 40th anniversary of UFO gig down in American University, and I got censored on stage by MUFON at that time, MUFON of those days. And I had to write a report, my thing, which was not how I work. And I got halfway through, and maybe I cracked a joke or too many, I don't know. And there's 1,000 people sitting in the room, and I got cut off. And I just said, well, hell with these people. And I went out on the lawn. I said, if anyone wants to hear what I'm here to say, come out on the lawn. And it wasn't the Larry story. It's never been about me. It's about trying to get everyone out, and everything you've really taken forward, it was always that. It wasn't look at me. It was, I didn't want no one looking at me. So I meet this guy in the hallway, and I go, I didn't remember him, but he stood out. He's not very tall, but he stood out to me, and we got and I heard him on stage. There was an abduction panel, and people were arguing, and the debunker of the time, Philip Klass, was pointing at people. It was kind of funny. And it was a panel, and he was on it. The very measured kind of voice up there was who had also had an experience with this guy. And I knew, and you know how this stuff goes, John, the way things just unfold, and you're like, no way. But it does. I knew that minute, whoever this guy was on stage, he's writing the book with me. He didn't know it. I knew it. And I don't know why I knew it. And then afterward, he's in the hallway, and I kind of remember that. And how you doing? Or he said, how you doing? And that's where we began, though he didn't know for a while what I had in mind for him. And that would be Left at Eastgate, my co-author. But at that point, I was very fed up, and almost there was a time where I wanted to say, I made the whole, well, you couldn't have say you made it up, and just get away from it. But sadly, you wake up with yourself every day. And I was always concerned about yourself and all the other guys that, were affected, because I know it wasn't a lighthouse, and I know someone else is there, at the very least. And it's not about me. It affected a lot of people in a lot of different ways, as you know better than most. And that's where we began. And I wanted to be the true way on how this came out. There's my opinion of things. And it's more of a story of, and it's 100% true on how who I was before, during, and after. And I wrote it just in that moment, and then we try to let the reader, whatever, blah, 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 find their own way through it. And then I knew I needed an objective voice, though having an experiencer also write it isn't too objective, but I need someone to kind of know that vibe. Though I've never met someone more uncomfortable with the phenomenon than my dear co-author, who, he had an amazing thing happen. And then when we get back there, we had an amazing thing happen, which none of this makes sense. It's the craziest thing. I wish it was someone else it happened to. And that's really how Peter and I started, on trying to get a document out, really, which would light a fire or provoke, we didn't know it would take so many years, provoke other people to come forward.
Okay, now, you guys do this book, all right? Now, you have a memo, you have a tape, all right? You have some people in England that did some research. What did you learn going forward besides your story? What did you guys come across to solidify the case, to make the case stronger? What are some of the things that you guys learned that you have in there and that you can talk about that establish the case and make it stronger than it was prior to your book?
Yeah, I got the memo out, really, and also the audio. I got that in Japan. That was being sold around England also, but not going out to the public. And I brought that back and handed it to Chuck DeCaro from Japan in '84. And so I'm proud of those two things. I thought they moved, even though they were halts, and sell them. There was money on them over here for sure. And I thought maybe it gave the human tone. I'll let Peter go. Peter, what did you find? I'm too biased on all of it. I mean, go ahead. What did it seem to you? I mean, because maybe you wanted to run,
Sure. Well, again, Larry and I shook hands on writing a book together in early July of 1987. We had connected the week before in Washington. At that time, I was almost a dozen years involved in the work, and I was looking for a serious writing project. I have to say that when I heard Larry speak, up until that point where he said he'd just been told his time was up and he had to stop. And many of us left the hall and followed him outside and listened to the rest of what he had to say. John, I had spoken to a number of people over the years before then, through my friendship and working with Bud Hopkins and other researchers who alleged that they were military witnesses to UFO events. And in a number of cases, they may have been completely decent people, but I had the sense they were augmenting, exaggerating, building up their position. And of course, there's very little they could put forward to back it up. But there was something about Larry. I think it came down to two things for me. An anger that was so fixed in one direction, an obsession about trying to find out what had happened to him and other men when he was still a teenager. I mean, Larry was 19 when it happened. I know you weren't that much off that mark, and that he had been driven for the years since. When we met and when he put forward his plan, his proposal struck me as something very unusual. If he was trying to fool me, fool the world, or was pathological or a Manchurian candidate or a liar or a hoaxer, which was, I will turn over literally everything I have to you, even remotely relative to this case. And of course, he left the service with copies of a good part of his service record. Also turned over to me contact information for other witnesses, including yourself, for high school friends, his mother, and invited me to do everything I could to trip him up, prove he was wrong, a liar, confused, misunderstood. And if I could do that, that should be what I should write about in the book. Of course, it would be kind of a skitsy book, but I thought this is either Machiavellian clever or simply the mark of somebody who is saying, prove me wrong, because I know I'm telling the truth as well as I can. And the first several years were focused in great part on trying to trip him up. Larry can confirm that there were times I'd come back at him in interviews asking him a question I had already asked him a dozen or 15 times. And Larry, not being the Buddha, would occasionally get short-tempered with me about it. But he also understood that I needed to know in no uncertain terms that I was working with somebody I could trust. As he started to turn over other things to me, which included audio cassettes that Larry Fawcett, the original investigator that he had worked with along with Barry Greenwood, who were the ones who instituted the FOIA that resulted, of course, as we all know, in the release of Colonel Halt's January 81 memo, that I'd listened to all the original cassettes that Fawcett did with Greg Batcham and with Adrian Bustinza and transcribed them. I saw that there were areas which suggested some conflict or an injection of some what sounded fantastic to me, but there was so much nuance and otherwise that backed up what he was saying. After 7 months or so of what I'd call the armchair phase of research, we returned to England. Well, he returned. I came with him. This would have been in February of 88. Very well written about in detail in our book. But some things happened to me that week that upset me to such a degree that I came very close to withdrawing from the project. And they had nothing to do with discrediting Larry's account or having second thoughts about the authenticity. It was feeling overwhelmed in the exact opposite manner. Any readers of Left at Eastgate know that on the first night of our very first visit back to Suffolk, we had a multiple UFO sighting event. Larry had said to me even early that evening that we were going to see something over the week that we were there. We had planned to be there a week. And I thought he was either yanking my chain or being dramatic. I mean, this was very emotional for him and pretty amazing for me to be back with this particular witness, his first trip back, 8 years and 2 months since the events had happened. And when these things started to transpire, I was quite overwhelmed. We saw UFO phenomena, all soundless, that varied between fully articulated, lit-up discs hanging in the area over or near the base, a thing that was coming from the ground, taking off out of the forest with I literally had an illusion that it must be going up a road because it looked so much at a distance like an automobile traveling up a road, but there was no road. It was simply leaving the forest by air, things that were star-sized that were zipping around, and ultimately something that lit up full scale at the end of the field that we were standing next to, only 100, 200 yards from the perimeter of the base. I think at one point I most certainly went into physiological shock. Larry got very angry at it and started walking toward it and yelling at it. All this being audio taped because, like Charles Halt, that night in the woods, I not only carried an audio cassette with me for all those first years that we worked together, I would always have one in each pocket. Machines fail, batteries die, whatever. So all of this was recorded, and the transcript, as well as it can put it together, is included in the book. It has been voice stress analyzed twice over the years by two completely independent people who verified that there doesn't seem to be any kind of deception going on. But John, to your most important question here, what did we turn up in the course of our years of investigation that confirmed or reiterated or solidified the reality of the events in question? I think a number of things, but for me, the most extraordinary was the soil analysis, and let me say exactly site-specific to the precise location that Larry had identified for me on maps before we went to England, and that I'm very careful about laying out how precisely he identified it at that moment that we first confronted it. We had returned to Capel Green, the field where the third night's event took place, and walking through those last 100 yards of forest or so, Larry was quiet and reflective, very internalized. I understood it, respected it. This was tense. And we finally get to that point, and John, you know it so well, where you come through a point of the forest, and the forest cover is breaking away, and you can see Capel Green coming into view before you with the stand of trees. If you come right up to the fence line, look left, you see the oak tree. Look off to the left, and you'll see the farmhouse. And as the view opened, Larry's right arm, and this is all audio taped, it's included in the transcript, it shot right out reflexively, and he pointed out into the field, not that far, and said something to the effect of, "It sat right there." And then there are several sustained seconds of silence. And he follows it by saying, "But of course it's a coincidence that that exact area where it sat is kind of a discolored oval." Now, the way I had trained myself to work, I had wonderful mentors, including Bud Hopkins, Pete Mazzola, a tough, no-nonsense police detective who taught me a lot about investigation. Another extraordinary gentleman, was not, "Oh my God, a trace case. Look, there's a mark on the ground from where a UFO sat 8 years, 2 months before." Tempting as that might have been, yeah, sure, there were very real reasons it could be a coincidence. First, we're coming upon a field on an overcast day that's been plowed. We don't know whether we're looking in the distance at something that's convex, concave. It could be the way the light was caught. It could be that a ton of nitrate fertilizer was dumped there 6 months earlier and not fully graded. Lightning could have struck it. Who knew? But my first thought was not, yeah, look, there's the mark from where the thing sat. However, over the next 2 hours or so, as we walked around the field, we kept coming back to it. I was shooting 35 millimeter film. Some of your listeners, if they're old enough, remember the little plastic containers that the rolls of film came in. And I was using microcassettes, and I improvised. I took the little labels from the microcassettes, labeled some of these film canisters, and drew soil from what was obviously an area where the soil was different than any other where in the field, right in that ellipse. Took soil from about the edge and then further out in the field. When we got back to the bed and breakfast, we conducted a simple experiment with our hosts.
And I want to stop you there because
sure.
we'll get back to it because we got to take a break. But we're right at that point now where you've got the soil samples, okay? And I firmly believe to this day, like you guys encountered over there and you got these soil samples, there's still stuff going on over there, and there needs to be a team put together to go back and do a complete analysis of the area. But when we come back off the break, we'll go into what the soil samples showed, and then we'll spend the rest of the time talking about where we are today and some of the stuff that was misleading done over the years and where we are today.
Right.
So we'll be right back.
Thanks, John. To find out the latest on Phenomenon Radio, log on to the website, phenomenonradio.com. And for the latest in science, the environment, and real X-Files, visit the award-winning website, Earthfiles.com, with over 2,000 in-depth reports that go beyond the 6 o'clock news. That's Earthfiles.com. We'll be right back after these brief messages for the final segment of tonight's program on KGRARadio.com. You're listening to Phenomenon Radio.
Around the world for decades have come high strangeness reports of mysterious aerial lights, beams, animal mutilations, human abductions, secret space and military programs focused on an alien presence. One reporter of these Earth mysteries is Emmy Award-winning TV producer, writer, and editor Linda Moulton Howe. She reports and edits the science, environment, and real X-Files news website, Earthfiles.com.
We are moving from the paradigm that we are alone in the universe to a new one in which we are not alone. And something out there is interacting with us, our animals and plant life, forcing glimpses of other realities upon us.
Linda has produced 4 large books about these phenomena with hundreds of color images and illustrations that reviewers such as New York Times best-selling author Jim Marrs describes as an amazing accumulation of evidence. All her books, An Alien Harvest, the 2-volume Glimpses of Other Realities, and Mysterious Lights and Crop Circles, along with documentaries, are available in the shop at earthfiles.com.
Live alternative talk radio in over 125 countries across Mother Earth. KGRARadio.com.
Welcome back to the final segment of Phenomenon Radio with tonight's very special guests, Larry Warren and Peter Robbins. Here's John Burroughs.
Thanks, Race, and we're back. When we went to break, Peter, you were talking about you just taking some soil samples from the area where Larry, when you guys went back and visited the UK, said the area where the incident happened, and maybe you can go into what the results were from. Obviously, you had to test it afterwards and go into that.
Yes. Glad to, John. What our initial homemade test suggested was that the control samples taken in the field when combined with water became mud in a matter of seconds when you stirred it up in a jar lid. The sample taken from the area that seemed to have been affected, where the thing sat, it didn't matter how you worked it with the back of the spoon or whatever. The dirt either floated like dust on the top of the water or sank in clumps to the bottom. So we knew we had stumbled into something. What it was, what it represented, we had no idea. I returned kind of on a whim. About a year and 4 months later, I had finished a speaking job in France. It reflexively went back to Suffolk, went out to the field again. This time it's June 1990. The field is now filled with hay, grass that has gone yellow, except for that ellipse that we had observed a year plus before. It was bright green. And I had not had any collecting equipment with me, but when I came back the year later, I had consulted with a laboratory in Massachusetts called Springborn Environmental Laboratory. They had assigned a chemist to me who is named Matthew Moniz, who went on to become a good friend of Larry's and mine, and who has done analysis over the decades since then of anomalous material from other UFO or crop circle related sites. Very knowledgeable guy. Anyway, I went over on that trip with 3 or 4 large 2-quart heavy plastic collection containers, collected according to the way Matt had told me to. And I will say here, this was in violation of the property line of the Greenwell family that owns it, and I apologize for that. But the bottom line is I did get those samples, and the Springborn Environmental Lab chemist, Moniz, analyzed it. First thing he established was that the color of the soil was very different between the affected area and the control areas. However, he said this is not the wildest thing. It happens in farmers' fields. Second thing, under scanning under a scanning microscope capturing the structure of the soil, any layperson can see that whatever happened to the soil in the affected area, it is visually incredibly different than the soil in the control samples taken from further out in the field. Seed germination tests were conducted, where seeds from crops that would normally be grown in that area and other seeds are grown in the control samples. They came up normal. They took the precise amount of time that would be suggested for natural growth. However, all of the seeds that were germinated in soil from the affected area uniformly took much longer to mature, and when they did, Matthew's term was that only mutant strains were produced. So that answered why the grass was still green in that elliptical area where everything else in Capel Green was already going to hay. And when I send Race the links that I'm going to send him, I'm also going to send a number of photographs taken at that time and when we first visited, where viewers can see for themselves the differences. Then he went on to note that there were tiny flecks of iron appearing in the soil in that part of England. And that's the way it is with some soil in parts of the world. The composition can differ dramatically. But here, in the control samples, it was absolutely what it should have been according to the tables that they had to work with. In the affected sample, the amount of tiny, sand-sized grains of iron were in excess of 4 times the amount in the surrounding area. And when I asked Matthew about this, he said the only thing that he could think of that could account for it was something sat on that site, produced such a powerful electromagnetic effect. He said, think about it. You know, you're the size of a piece of sand. You're in soil. And something is attracting you to such a degree that you are literally forcing yourself through and around, sand and gravel and whatever to come into that area. That's a lot of magnetism. Perhaps the most, the reason that the soil in our initial test either sank to the bottom or floated to the top was that the pH had literally been blown out of it. It had lost its ability to integrate in a uniform way with water to form the simple compound of mud. And even under laboratory conditions, he said it was very difficult to fully get the soil to integrate. You could observe under a microscope that something had happened to those grains that made them shed water like the old proverbial off of a duck's back, which was also rather dramatic. The final result for me, I guess, is the most dramatic. This, as you guys know, this is all happening very close to the coast, maybe 5 or 6 miles. So one would expect and should, in fact, find a healthy component of sand as part of the soil makeup, which, of course, was the case here. However, in the affected sample, there was no sand. It had melted. It had been reduced to silica, which is an interim form of glass. People have asked me over the years, and I'm sure you guys as often or more so, do you think there was any possibility that this was a psyop? And of course, there was that aspect to it in terms of what you guys and others were put through. But no matter how profoundly successful the psychological operation, it doesn't melt sand into glass. Again, other evidences come up, and as Detective Mazzola taught me decades ago, what you look for as an investigator is to do your best to triangulate evidence, where physical evidence is backed up by military documents, which is backed up by credible accounts of witnesses, which is backed up by civilian accounts in the distance, which is backed up, et cetera, and that is essentially building the case. It's one of the reasons that Rendlesham, ultimately, when all is said and done, with all due respect to Roswell, continues to be the best all-round case that we have to work with today.
I don't disagree with you, and we've only got a few minutes left, but I want to add one note to that. Yeah. When we were over there in 10, Wing Keach came down and did some research. There was a high magnetic field presence there. Also on infrared, we picked up some stuff that you didn't see with the naked eye that was floating around in that area, and it all had to do down there in that Capitol Green area. Yeah. And the interesting thing was that when Jim and I walked back through it, we went back down there, but from way back, going up to today, and this is leading to the last 10 minutes we've got, was there's been a push to push it farther to the left of Capitol Green and out in the center, even to the left of the farmer's house. And even when you listen to Colonel Halt's tape, you can tell they were on the right side of the farmer's house. So on that note, let's go in the last 10 minutes. We're going to talk about a couple things, and I want to open it up this way. Over the years, okay, and there's been some griping going on recently because there's been some heat. I call it the heat's been turned up a little bit on the man in charge, which is Colonel Halt. And one of the things that Colonel Halt early on said, and this is documented, and it'll be brought up in a later show for people that want to say that what I'm about to say isn't true. Colonel Halt went out of his way very early on, going all the way through up until a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, to basically say the three people that were out there with him, three of the people that were out there with him that night, Larry, Adrian Bressenge, and myself weren't even there. Okay? Then the Colonel Halt tape was analyzed, and it showed on there and that Adrian and I were there. You could hear my name mentioned. You could hear Adrian on the radio. So that kind of blew his story a little bit. Okay? The part with Larry, that Larry wasn't even on duty, you guys have clearly shown that's not true. You had all the documentation to back that up. So now, what's very interesting is then he said, well, we were all in the fringes, we never were close. Well, what has happened, and it was because of you guys, which a lot of people aren't aware of, right before Colonel Hall got out, in the early 90s, I believe it was, and this was right before Unsolved Mysteries came out, which he, interestingly not, handed out statements that were done by Jim and I and Ed at that point and Lieutenant Baran, which showed the right dates, you know. But anyway, he did an interview with you guys in D.C., yes. And in that interview, there was a heavy discussion going on about where Larry was. And you got the transcripts, Peter. You've done it before, but I have a copy of the tape, and I'm sure you have the tape still. Yeah. Where he says, well, Larry never got out in front of us, but he could have been there around us. But then he says John and Adrian got out in front of us. Now, that has been brought to his attention over the years. Well, he knows now I have that tape, and he finally has admitted now in writing that, yes, okay, yeah, you and Adrian did go forward. But he has gone on for years trying to hold back some of what I call hold back what some went on that night. And I'm not sure totally why, because I can't believe as a man in charge that he would be holding it back just because he wanted to hold it back. So there has to be some reasoning behind the way he's went after us, the way his story has slowly disintegrated over the years, not to the point where he admits that Adrian and I went forward and that Larry was out there. So I'd like to get your thoughts, because I brought this up and we've got maybe 5 or 6 minutes left on some of that and that interview and everything else, if you would, please.
Yeah, let me jump in quick as possible and get out so Larry can speak, because we could do a whole show on this. I think it's a combination of factors we need to look at here. Number one, Mr. Halt's genuine animus toward Larry. Part of it is rooted in the fact, and it is established, nobody questions it, that the information that Larry gave to Larry Fawcett and Barry Greenwood was used as the basis for a FOIA, which resulted in the release of the only document for many years, and still the only American one that we really have to work with, confirming the events, even though they were redacted, compressed, minimized, on an Air Force letterhead signed by then Deputy Base Charles Halt, written several weeks after the fact. That hurt his career. He, at the time of these events, he had already been approved for promotion. He went from lieutenant colonel to colonel within a week or so of the event. And then for the rest of his time in the service, serving with honor, distinction, he did not advance a lick. It's maybe not fair to compare, but Colonel Williams, who we are convinced was involved, kept his head down, was not caught up so much in the cycle, maybe was better protected, left the service as a two-star general not that long afterwards. I think another fact is that there may well be pressure on Charles Halt because you guys, even with whatever confusion has been instilled into your thinking about the things that happened to you, you're credible, honorable, well-spoken individuals, and the things that you say are embarrassing to the United States Air Force, to a degree, as far as I'm concerned, to the National Security Agency, to the Ministry of Defense, and that's not good either. I think the other thing with Mr. Halt is it's almost an obsession at this point. Early on, he told us when we were in Washington, and we had spoken about on the phone before, and it's not been a secret, that he didn't understand why the National Security Agency was interested in Larry and you, Jim, but not him. He was an officer. He was in a command position. He was also a legitimate witness. I honestly feel there is a certain kind of underpinning of jealousy of how come they're interested in you and not him. And as he said to us when he contacted a source at the Pentagon, that gentleman got back to him faster than anyone ever had on anything in all of his years and made it clear that, yes, the agency is interested in Warren as far as the direct moment that we were talking about, and the reasons are none of your business. I think there was a certain amount of ego or defensiveness involved in that, and let me turn the table back to you guys.
Well, one thing I want to bring up, though, here's the thing that's never added up with me, is the fact that how could he lead a team out there, go through everything he did and have the tape and everything, and come back and say that he was never talked to about it? You know, yeah. We were interrogated basically from it sounds like, but how wasn't he not debriefed also? That's the part I have a hard time with myself. And it has come up over the years that even he can't remember certain things and is struggling with certain things. So on that note, Larry, we're getting ready to run out of time. So it's yours to close the show with. So take us home, Larry.
No, I think with Colonel Halt is, that dynamic's gone on for a long time. It isn't just me that he said things about. It's just, it's more often me. But I do, like I said earlier in the show, I recall him as, compared to some of the officers there that I met, pretty cool. And I think there's a hammer on him somewhere. And because, I don't think he's an evil person at all. I don't know what he has to deal with this. I don't like what he's done. I'm not sure he does. I don't think he does. I really don't think he does. I think there's a buried frustration and thing. I recall him as a really pretty accessible officer, though I never dealt with him on this, and I was never called into his office at all. But I think that still, if one day before we're all gone, that the guys that live this, we can, like John, you've been pushing, you've done great things, man. Is that we all can get together and we'd find, and I mean Jim, and Jim has his reality with this and everything else, and we have a go at each other quite often. It's more the people that don't know what they're talking about, the peripheral of this whole thing that just attach themselves to it in so many different ways that really annoy me more than the participants. but I guess that's the nature of this subject, which, I'm part of, but really don't want to be and don't consider myself part of it. I just try to do the right thing. And what happened to us over there, again, we have this fool in this country, Ridpath, still pushing the lighthouse, even to the point of ignorance. You have another guy that puts my name under Jim Peniston's picture in his books. And that's okay with some of these people. Nothing against Jim. It's just these are your experts. He was one of the host of Halt's Talk. So I would like to see some peace come there. Peter had to do an amazing thing, and he did. If I'd done it, I would have exploded on Facebook, which I try not to do anymore, and just moved on. Peter, you did a great thing. I appreciate it. It's a shame this is all has to happen. But what people should understand with all this heat 35 years later, nearly, that goes on, and that emotion, and, John in this, and all the guys, including Halt, something happened to us. And it was a lot more than a lighthouse or any other thing people want to come up with. And it was mind-blowing, and the world changed. And the average person don't know it. Unfortunately, we know it. And that's all. And I think, John, you're doing great stuff out there. And that was kind of on my wish list. Someone would come forward, and you did it. And you've been out a long time, but you've done great stuff. And I would stand with any of the witnesses, Jim, Halt, anything, if people started ganging on them. That's just how I am. Because I know they all went through it, one form or another. And it's that too important to let go, and it's never going to go away. Never.
Right. And I agree with you, Larry, and I really do think the walls need to come down. It's been 35 years in December, and I think that if we could all just check whatever it is at the door, the anger and all the deception and everything that's going on at the door, and meet somewhere, for a couple of days, I think that this would push this, not only would it take it to a different level, because people would come out of there understanding how they've been used, and I mean used by the government themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
And that we could put some closure for ourselves and put a definitive, I shouldn't say definitive, that's not the right way, because I don't know if that would be a definitive answer, but it will help us, the world, understand what took place 35 years ago to guys that were just out there doing their job.
Exactly. I'm with you.
And guys, I want to thank you for coming on, and we'll make sure we get everything posted on all the great work you guys have done. And Race, take us forward to next week.
Thank you very much.
Next week on Phenomenon Radio, Ray Boucher will join the show. For John Burroughs, Linda Moulton Howe, Larry Warren, and Peter Robbins, thanks so much for listening tonight. Right here on the station that brings you the very best in paranormal talk radio topics on the internet, we're KGRAradio.com.